Amid the luxury of an unforgettable dinner, a street girl delivers a warning impossible to ignore. And nothing will ever be the same again. The clock struck exactly 8 o'clock in the evening when Robert Anderson adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie one last time. The reflection in the mirror showed a 42-year-old man in the prime of his life. Grey hair at the temples gave him an air of distinction, while his dark brown eyes conveyed the confidence of someone who had carved out his place in the world. As the owner of Anderson Holdings, a conglomerate dominating the construction, technology, and energy sectors, Robert was the kind of man who inspired both admiration and envy in equal measure. From the window of his Upper East Side penthouse, he contemplated for a few moments the city lights that seemed to bow at his feet. New York City, with its exuberant beauty, was the perfect backdrop for his successful life. That special night, everything needed to be impeccable. The merger between his company and the Vanderbilt Group was about to become a reality, transforming into the largest corporate operation in the country. And it wasn't just in business that Robert was consolidating his empire. His relationship with Catherine Vanderbilt, the family heiress, completed the picture of perfection he had worked so hard to paint. His phone vibrated, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Thomas Mitchell, his personal assistant and right-hand man for over a decade. "Mr. Anderson, the driver is already waiting. The reservation at high tide has been confirmed for 9 o'clock, as requested. The table is number 12, Mrs. Vanderbilt's favorite." "Thank you, Thomas. Any news about the merger documents?" "Everything is ready for signing on Monday. The lawyers made the final review this afternoon and found no irregularities." "Perfect." Robert hung up with a satisfied smile. 15 years of hard work would culminate next week, when Anderson Holdings and the Vanderbilt Group would finally become a single corporate powerhouse. And to crown this moment, tonight would be special. An intimate dinner with Catherine at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. In the panoramic elevator descending the 20 floors of the building, Robert felt a pang of anxiety. It wasn't common for him, a man accustomed to multi-million-dollar negotiations, but there was something different in the air. Perhaps it was just the importance of the moment, he thought, adjusting his shirt cuffs. High Tide wasn't just a restaurant. It was a gastronomic temple known only to a select New York elite. Located in a renovated historic mansion, it offered not only excellent food, but also the discretion that the powerful so valued. Cars stopped at a private entrance, away from curious eyes, and guests enjoyed individual rooms with a view of the river. Catherine was already waiting when he arrived, dressed in an elegant navy blue outfit that highlighted her fair skin and blonde hair. She was the embodiment of sophistication. At 35, she combined the beauty of a mature woman with the vivacity of someone who had always had everything. "You're late, darling," she said, offering her cheek for a kiss. "Only 5 minutes. For a businessman, that's punctuality." Catherine smiled, that smile that always seemed to carry a secret. "And for a woman in love, it's an eternity." The maitre d' led them to their table, strategically positioned by the window that offered a spectacular view of the river. The discreet lighting, created mainly by candles, created an atmosphere of intimacy. A pianist softly played classical compositions in a corner of the hall, completing the exclusive ambience. "Champagne to start, Mr. Anderson?" asked the sommelier. "Yes, bring your best. We're celebrating." As the employee moved away, Catherine leaned slightly over the table. "And what exactly are we celebrating, Robert? The merger or something more?" He smiled, feeling the weight of the velvet box in the inner pocket of his jacket. "Patience, my dear. The night is just beginning." The champagne was served with the pomp expected from an establishment of that caliber. The crystal glasses clinked in the silent toast they exchanged. In Catherine's eyes, Robert tried to see the same enthusiasm he felt. After all, beyond the corporate merger, there was another kind of union he planned to propose that night. "I spoke with Father this afternoon," she commented after the first sip. "He was strangely nostalgic, said that when he started the Vanderbilt Group, he never imagined that one day he would be handing over control to another man. I'm not taking control, Catherine. We're joining forces. Edward will continue as chairman of the board." I know that, you know that. But for a man of his generation, well, let's say it's difficult to understand that times have changed. The conversation flowed naturally as they enjoyed the appetizer, a delicate octopus carpaccio with fresh herb oil. Robert talked about expansion plans for the Northeast, while Catherine told about her recent trip to New York, supposedly for a series of meetings with international investors. I took the opportunity to visit that jewelry store you mentioned, she said between one bite and another. They have truly extraordinary pieces. Robert noticed a slight change in her tone of voice. Was it anxiety, expectation for the marriage proposal that would certainly come at the end of the night? Or was there something more? It was when the main course arrived, a filet mignon with port wine sauce for him and an asparagus risotto with truffle shavings for her, that the unexpected happened. A small commotion formed at the entrance of the restaurant. The security guards seemed to be trying to contain someone, but without drawing much attention, so as not to disturb the refined environment. In a matter of seconds, however, a girl of approximately 9 years old managed to escape and ran into the main hall. She wore worn clothes, was barefoot, and had disheveled dark hair framing a thin face with intensely expressive eyes. Before the security guards could reach her, the child had already reached Robert and Catherine's table. "Sir, please." The childish voice sounded urgent, almost desperate. "There's something wrong with her food." Silence fell over the restaurant. Catherine turned pale, the risotto spoon suspended in the air. Robert, initially confused, stared at the girl. There was a disturbing sincerity in those eyes. "What did you say, little one?" He leaned in, trying to understand. I saw when they put it in. Don't eat. Please don't let her eat." The girl's eyes fixed on Catherine's plate. At that moment, the security guards arrived, grabbing the child by the arms. "Sorry, Mr. Anderson. We'll remove this intruder immediately." Robert raised his hand in a gesture for them to stop. A strange feeling came over him. Why would a street child enter such an exclusive restaurant and make such a statement? How did she know his name? "Wait," he said. "Let her speak." Catherine seemed to have regained her composure. "Robert, please. It's just a street girl trying to get attention. She probably wants money." "No, ma'am," protested the girl, fighting against the security guard. "I saw the man in the suit putting something in your food when it was coming from the kitchen." A murmur ran through the hall. The restaurant manager approached, visibly embarrassed. "Mr. Anderson, we sincerely apologize for this incident. We'll prepare new plates immediately." Catherine let out an impatient sigh. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to let a beggar ruin our special night." She picked up her fork and brought a portion of risotto to her mouth. It was at that moment that Robert made a decision that would forever change the course of his life. In a quick movement, he held Catherine's wrist, preventing her from eating. "Perhaps we should be cautious," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the growing tension. "What harm is there in waiting for a new plate?" Catherine's eyes met his, and for a brief moment Robert glimpsed something he had never noticed before. Was it frustration, anger, or perhaps guilt? "As you wish," she replied dryly, dropping the fork that clinked against the fine porcelain. The manager quickly ordered the plates to be removed, while the security guard still held the girl. "What's your name?" Robert asked the child. "Maria, sir." "And how did you get in here, Maria?" "Through the back. I work on the corner selling candy. I saw the man in the suit talking to someone from the restaurant, and then he went into the kitchen. Nobody noticed. I saw." Robert observed Catherine from the corner of his eye. She remained impassive, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table, a habit he knew well, manifesting only when she was deeply troubled. "Robert, this is absurd. Let's end this. Shall we then continue with our night?" Catherine's voice sounded controlled, but there was a note of urgency that didn't go unnoticed. It was then that she put her hand to her forehead, closing her eyes for a moment. "I'm not feeling well," she murmured. "Catherine?" The concern was genuine in Robert's voice. "It must be just a migraine," she tried to smile, but sweat was beginning to bead on her forehead. Maybe we should leave." But before they could get up, Catherine staggered. Her skin had taken on a frightening pallor and her breathing was becoming increasingly difficult. In a few seconds, the malaise transformed into something much more serious. She put her hands to her throat, her eyes wide with panic. "Someone call an ambulance!" shouted Robert, supporting Catherine, who was now convulsing. Chaos broke out in the refined restaurant. While the staff rushed to call for help, Robert held Catherine in his arms, his mind filled with questions. How could the girl have known? What was happening to his fiancée? And if Maria hadn't appeared, would he himself have noticed that something was wrong? Amid the confusion, he looked for little Maria, but she had disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared, leaving behind only a warning that had just saved a life and, perhaps, destroyed a dream. As he waited for the ambulance, holding the unconscious Catherine in his arms, Robert felt that something much bigger than a simple malaise was unfolding. Something that threatened not just the dinner that night, but the entire future he had so carefully planned. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The bright antiseptic lights of the corridor at St. Luke's Hospital contrasted drastically with the cozy atmosphere of the restaurant. Robert walked back and forth in the reserved waiting room, his once impeccable suit now wrinkled, his tie loosened. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he checked his watch for the 10th time in the last 5 minutes. 4 hours had passed since the ambulance had arrived at the restaurant. Catherine had been immediately attended to and rushed to the nearest hospital. During the journey, her condition had worsened significantly, with seizures and respiratory difficulty that required intubation in the ambulance. Dr. Paul Carson, clinical director of the hospital and a personal friend of Robert, entered the room with a grave expression. At 60, he was a respected physician, known for his discretion, an essential quality for someone who attended to the New York elite. "How is she, Paul?" The anxiety was palpable in Robert's voice. "Stable, but the condition is still concerning." The doctor adjusted his thin-framed glasses. "Initially, we suspected a severe allergic reaction, but the symptoms aren't typical. We performed a gastric lavage and sent samples for emergency toxicological analysis." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "Toxicological? Are you suggesting she was poisoned?" Paul chose his words carefully. "We're considering all possibilities. What that girl said at the restaurant, well, we can't ignore it. Do we have any results yet? Preliminary only. We found traces of an unusual substance. We need more time to identify it completely, but—" The doctor hesitated. "It's not something we normally find in food or beverages." Robert ran his hand through his hair, trying to process the information. The image of Maria appeared in his mind, those childish eyes loaded with urgency, the conviction in her fragile voice. Who would want to harm Catherine? He murmured, more to himself than to the doctor. "That's a question you should perhaps consider very carefully, my friend." Paul put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "You are public figures, involved in a billion-dollar negotiation. Unfortunately, power and money tend to attract danger." At that moment, Robert's phone vibrated. It was Thomas, his assistant. "Mr. Anderson, I contacted the restaurant security as requested. They managed to get footage from the surveillance cameras. There's something intriguing." "What exactly?" "I'd prefer not to discuss it over the phone. I'm already on my way to the hospital with the file." Robert hung up, feeling the anxiety grow. "Paul, I need a favor. I want to ensure that no one, absolutely no one besides the essential medical team, has access to Catherine." The doctor nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I've already arranged it. She's in a private room with security at the door. Only myself and 2 trusted nurses are authorized to enter." While waiting for Thomas, Robert went to the corridor window. Outside, New York City continued its nightlife, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the hospital. The city lights seemed to mock the darkness that was beginning to form in his mind. Thomas arrived 20 minutes later, bringing a laptop and a worried expression that didn't match his usual unflappable professionalism. "What did you find?" asked Robert as soon as they were alone in a small meeting room at the hospital. "It's better you see it with your own eyes." Thomas opened the computer and started a security video. These are images from the high tide kitchen, captured approximately 30 minutes before you were served. On the black and white screen, Robert observed the frantic movement typical of a high-end restaurant kitchen. Chefs working with precision, waiters coming in and going out with elaborate dishes. Now watch this man carefully. Thomas pointed to a figure who was discreetly entering through the service door. Robert leaned in to see better and felt his blood freeze in his veins. This is Richard Vanderbilt. Exactly, Catherine's cousin. Richard was a tall, slender man with a natural elegance he had inherited from the Vanderbilt family. At 40, he occupied a secondary position in the family empire, always in the shadow of his uncle, Edward Vanderbilt, and now increasingly overshadowed by Catherine's rise in the company. In the video, Richard quickly greeted one of the chefs who seemed uncomfortable with his presence. After a brief conversation, the chef walked away, leaving Richard alone near the station where the dishes were finalized before going to the dining room. "Keep watching," instructed Thomas. With a quick and precise movement, Richard took something out of the inner pocket of his jacket, a small vial. Looking around to make sure he wasn't being observed, he poured some drops over one of the dishes. "That's the risotto that would be served to Catherine," explained Thomas. The waiter confirms, "That was the dish he took to your table." Robert felt nauseated. "Richard, but why? What would be the motive?" "We still don't know, sir, but there's more." Thomas advanced the video. See who appears a few minutes later. A female figure entered the kitchen, walking with the confidence of someone who was in familiar territory. Even with the limited quality of the image, there was no mistaking Catherine Vanderbilt. "She went to the kitchen before meeting me at the restaurant." Robert could hardly believe what he was seeing. In the video, Catherine briefly conversed with the same chef who had spoken with Richard. She seemed to be checking something. Her gestures were calm, controlled, as if she were just checking the preparations for the special dinner. Then she left, apparently satisfied. "What does this mean, Thomas? Did Catherine know what Richard was planning?" "I can't say with certainty, sir, but considering the sequence of events..." Robert stood up, abruptly unable to remain seated. His head was spinning with possibilities all equally disturbing. If Catherine was involved, why would she herself have been poisoned? Unless... "The girl," he murmured. "The girl changed everything." "Sir?" "If Maria hadn't appeared, I would have eaten from Catherine's plate at some point, wouldn't I? It's common for us to share food." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the logic. "And with you hospitalized, or to worse, the merger would be temporarily suspended. And who would take control of the situation in the Vanderbilt family if Edward was out of the country as he is now?" "Catherine, naturally. Or in her absence." "Richard," Robert completed, the pieces beginning to fit together in a terrible puzzle. "But something went wrong. Catherine ate some of the risotto before I could completely prevent her." At that moment, Paul entered hurriedly into the room, his face pale. "Robert, we need to talk. The complete toxicology results just arrived." "And..." The doctor hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "You can speak in front of him. What did they find?" "The substance found in Catherine's body is an experimental compound called RC47. It's extremely rare, originally developed for pharmaceutical research, but never approved for human use due to unpredictable side effects. And how would Richard have access to something like that? That's the most concerning point. This compound is being studied by only 3 laboratories in the world. One of them is Vanderbilt Pharmaceuticals." Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Vanderbilt Pharmaceuticals was one of the lesser-known divisions of the group, but extremely lucrative, specializing in high-complexity medications. "There's one more thing," continued Paul, visibly uncomfortable. "This compound has a peculiar characteristic. It reacts differently depending on the person's DNA. For some, it causes only mild symptoms, similar to food poisoning. For others, it can be fatal," completed Robert, feeling a knot in his stomach. "Exactly. And here's the most disturbing detail. The reaction seems to be genetically determined. In other words, Someone would need to know my genetic profile to predict how I would react. Robert's voice was just a whisper. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of that revelation were absorbed. If someone had access to Robert's genetic profile, it meant an invasion of privacy on an alarming level. "Sir," Thomas hesitated, "you had medical exams recently, didn't you? For the merger insurance." "Yes, 3 weeks ago. Complete exams including genetic mapping for health risks, a requirement from the insurer for high-value policies." "And where were these exams conducted?" "At the Vanderbilt Medical Center." The 3 men exchanged concerned looks. The connections were becoming increasingly evident and disturbing. Paul checked his watch. "I need to go back to check on Catherine. She's still sedated, but I hope she'll regain consciousness in the next few hours." "When will I be able to see her?" asked Robert, his mind divided between concern and suspicion. "Perhaps by morning, but—" "Robert." Paul hesitated at the door. "If what we suspect is true, be careful what you say to her. We don't know who's involved in this plot." After the doctor left, Robert turned to Thomas. "I need to find that girl, Maria. She's the only independent witness we have." "I've already initiated the search, sir. I asked the security team to scour the area around the restaurant. If she works selling candy around there, someone must know her." Robert nodded, grateful for his assistant's efficiency. "There's one more thing I need you to do. Discreetly check all recent financial movements of both Anderson Holdings and the Vanderbilt Group, especially international transfers or unusual amounts." "You suspect embezzlement?" "At this moment, Thomas, I suspect everything and everyone." Robert passed his hand over his tired face. "I also want you to verify Catherine's recent trips to New York. She mentioned meetings with investors, but I want to confirm each meeting, each dinner, each call." While Thomas was taking notes, Robert approached the window again. The city continued, its life out there, oblivious to the drama unfolding within those white walls, like his own life had been until a few hours ago, following an apparently perfect script, without noticing the shadows that moved behind the scenes. The image of Catherine, pale and unconscious in a hospital bed, overlapped with the memory of the elegant and confident woman he planned to marry. Were they the same person? Or was the Catherine he knew and loved just a carefully constructed illusion? And then, like a flash, he remembered the velvet box in his pocket. The engagement ring he had planned to offer that night, a symbol of a future that now seemed to be crumbling. "Sir?" Thomas's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I forgot to mention, Mr. Richard Vanderbilt called a while ago, asking about his cousin's health condition. He said he heard about the incident and is on his way to the hospital." Robert felt his body stiffen. "Alert security. I don't want Richard anywhere near Catherine." "I've already arranged it, sir. And—" Thomas hesitated again. "Perhaps you should also consider your own safety. If someone tried once—" The words didn't need to be completed. The danger that had emerged at the elegant Upper East Side restaurant hadn't disappeared, only changed in form and intensity. "Thank you for your concern, Thomas, but I can't hide now. I need to understand what's happening, and above all, I need to find Maria." At that moment, as if responding to a silent call, Robert's phone vibrated again. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you want to know the truth about what happened tonight, meet me tomorrow at 7 a.m. in Union Square. Come alone. M." Robert felt his heart race. M for Maria? Or was it another piece in that dangerous game he had just discovered? Either way, he knew he had no choice. The search for truth had begun, and now there was no turning back. The dawn was long and restless for Robert. The few hours he spent in his penthouse after leaving the hospital at Thomas's insistence were dominated by dark thoughts and doubts that multiplied like shadows at dusk. Sleep, when it came, brought fragmented nightmares where Catherine and Maria alternated in confused scenes, interspersed with images of Richard Vanderbilt smiling while pouring a transparent liquid into crystal glasses. At 5:30 in the morning, Robert was already up. He ignored his usual exercise routine and the elaborate coffee his personal chef usually prepared. He dressed with calculated simplicity, jeans, a cotton shirt without a visible brand, and a discreet blazer. In the mirror, he saw a different man from the businessman he used to face every morning. There was a new tension in his face, a cautious gleam in his eyes. "Don't use your usual car," Thomas had recommended the night before. "And leave your cell phone at home. If someone wants to track you." Robert followed the advice, opting for a regular taxi instead of the bulletproof Mercedes with a driver that normally transported him. The city was still waking up when he arrived at Union Square, in the historic center of Manhattan. The place, an important landmark of New York history, mixed colonial architecture with the brutalism of modern administrative buildings around it. At that hour, the square was populated mainly by workers crossing on their way to the first shift and homeless people gathering their belongings after another night in the open. Positioning himself near a fountain, Robert observed every movement around him. Years of tense negotiations had taught him to notice details and anticipate situations. Still, when the voice sounded behind him, he couldn't avoid a start. "You actually came." It wasn't the childish voice of Maria, but rather that of an adult woman. Robert turned slowly. Before him stood a woman of approximately 30 years, brown hair tied in a simple bun, modest but clean clothes. Her eyes, however, were unmistakable, the same expressive eyes that had warned him at the restaurant. "Maria?" he asked, confused. The woman smiled slightly. "My name is Marion Sanders. Maria is my sister." "Your sister? But let's walk." "Mr. Anderson, it's not safe to stand still." Intrigued, Robert accompanied her as they moved away from the fountain toward the waterfront. The sun was beginning to rise, casting golden reflections on the East River. "My sister is 9 years old," explained Marion, keeping her voice low. "She told me what happened last night at the restaurant. It was she who saw Richard Vanderbilt entering the kitchen, but it was I who sent the message to you." "How did you know my number?" "I work in cleaning at Oceania Building." She made a significant pause. Robert immediately understood. The Oceania Building housed the headquarters of Anderson Holdings. "You work at my company." "Outsourced, New Horizons Company. For 3 years, I've been cleaning the executive floor, including your office, Mr. Anderson." The revelation left Robert momentarily speechless. How many times had that woman entered his office while he didn't even notice her presence? "Maria sells candy near high tide," continued Marion. We don't have much. I've been raising her and our younger brother Luke since our mother passed away 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," murmured Robert genuinely. "That's not what we need to talk about." Marion stopped, turning to face him. "Maria has a gift. She can always perceive things that others don't notice, since she was little. Doctors call it hyper-observation associated with a mild autism spectrum, but I call it a sixth sense." Was it this sixth sense that made her enter the restaurant? "No," Marion resumed walking. "It was what she saw. Richard Vanderbilt had been in that area other times. She recognized him from a magazine she found in the trash, that Forbes cover, from last month, with the Vanderbilt family." Robert remembered that edition well. The 50 most influential families in America was emblazoned on the cover, with the Vanderbilts featured for their business tradition. Yesterday, when Maria saw him entering furtively through the restaurant's back door, she thought it was strange. She kept watching. When she saw him leaving, she noticed that he seemed too happy. Her words, not mine. And how did she get into the restaurant? Through the same place he did. The security was confused with the waiter's movement, and she took advantage of the breach. Maria is small and fast. They reached a more isolated point of the riverfront, where the noise of the city was muffled by the sound of waves breaking gently. "That doesn't explain how you knew Catherine would get sick," observed Robert. "Your sister couldn't predict that." "No, but she saw Richard putting something in the food, and more importantly," Marion hesitated, as if measuring the impact of her next words. "She overheard his conversation with the chef. Something about compatible genetic profile and specific reaction." Robert's blood froze. That confirmed the suspicions raised by the toxicological exams. The poison had been specifically chosen for its interaction with a certain type of DNA. Why are you telling me this, Marion? Why risk yourself? The woman smiled sadly. You don't recognize me, do you? I didn't really expect you to. I'm just a cleaner. Should I recognize you? My father worked on the construction of the Brooklyn Heights complex, the first major project of Anderson Holdings. An accident at the site left him paralyzed. You paid for his treatment for 2 years, until his last day. Robert vaguely remembered the incident which occurred in the early years of his company, when he still made a point of knowing each employee by name. Anthony Sanders. That's right. Marion's eyes shone with contained tears. You not only paid for the treatment, you visited him in the hospital. You ensured we received fair compensation when he was gone. At that time, many construction companies simply ignored such accidents. A respectful silence hung between them, filled only by the distant sound of waves and the awakening of the city. When Maria came home yesterday, desperate about what she had seen, I knew I needed to help. Not just out of gratitude, but because, she hesitated again, because there are more things you need to know. What things? Last week, while cleaning the meeting room on the 18th floor, I overheard a conversation. The room should have been empty, but 2 people entered without noticing me. I was in the supply closet. Who were they? Your fiancée, Catherine Vanderbilt, and a man I didn't recognize, not American. He spoke with an accent. What were they talking about? Something about offshore. Transfers completed and documents prepared for contingency. The man asked if he suspected anything, and she replied that you were completely in the dark, that the engagement ring was the final proof of this. Robert felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The velvet box was still in his jacket, the diamond ring that had cost a small fortune, and that symbolized a future that now seemed like an elaborate farce. There's one more thing, continued Marion, her voice almost a whisper. They mentioned something about the final test at dinner, and that after that the controlling interest would be guaranteed. When they left, I was terrified, not knowing what to do with that information. Why didn't you come to me before? Marion looked at him with a mixture of sadness and pragmatism. Mr. Anderson, would you really have listened to an outsourced cleaner telling stories about your fiancé? Or would you have fired me for listening to private conversations? The question hit Robert like lightning. She was right. A week ago, at the height of his preparations for the merger and the marriage proposal, he probably would have dismissed it as gossip or envy. After Maria returned from the restaurant yesterday, I connected the dots. I realized that what I heard was part of something bigger, something dangerous. Marion took a small flash drive from her pocket. Last night, after Maria fell asleep, I went back to the office. I used my cleaning badge to get in. I know it was wrong, but what's on there? Robert interrupted, looking at the device. Copies of emails from the IT room. They're restoring the server after that hacker attack last month, remember? All communications from the board for the last 6 months are temporarily stored on a local server with physical access. Robert took the flash drive, feeling its insignificant weight in the palm of his hand. You risked a lot for this. You saved my family once. I thought it was time to return the favor. The sun had fully risen, illuminating the bay with its golden early morning light. In the distance, the Empire State Building emerged majestically, a silent witness to centuries of New York stories, some glorious, others as dark as the one unfolding at that moment. I need to get back to the hospital, said Robert carefully, putting away the flash drive. Catherine should be waking up now. Be careful. Marion briefly touched his arm. If Richard discovers that he didn't succeed, well, he might try again. Why do you think the target was me, not Catherine? From what I heard in the conversation, someone needed to exit the scene for the plan to work. And from what Maria saw at the restaurant, the adulterated food was on her plate, not yours. But Catherine was the one who got sick. Exactly. Something went wrong. Marion looked around, suddenly apprehensive. I need to go. Maria and Luke are alone at home. Where do you live? Queens. Building 217 near the main staircase. Robert nodded. memorizing the address. "You're not safe. There. If Richard or whoever is involved in this discovers what Maria saw, we have nowhere to go, Mr. Anderson. I'll arrange a place. Meanwhile, keep Maria inside. Say she's sick, anything, and please, call me Robert." A small smile appeared on Marion's tired face. "That would be as inappropriate." "Nothing is appropriate or normal since last night, Marion." He returned the smile, feeling an unexpected connection with this woman who had risked so much to warn him. "I'll send someone, trustworthy, to pick you up this afternoon. Someone you know from HR, maybe. Miss Judy from cleaning. She's like a mother to me." "Perfect. She'll take you to a safe place until we resolve this." Marion nodded, the relief visible in her eyes. "Thank you, Robert." As he watched her walk away, blending into the growing crowd of workers now populating the square, Robert felt a contradictory mixture of emotions. On one hand, the crushing weight of betrayal, Catherine, the woman he loved, apparently involved in a conspiracy against him. On the other, a strange sense of clarity, as if a blindfold had been removed from his eyes. His disposable cell phone vibrated. It was Thomas. "Sir, there's news. Catherine woke up half an hour ago. She's insistently asking for you." "How is she?" "Stable, anxious, and—" a hesitation in Thomas's usually confident voice. "There's something strange, sir. She seems genuinely confused about what happened. Either she's an exceptional actress or she was also deceived," completed Robert, new possibilities forming in his mind. "I'm on my way. Meanwhile, I want you to do 2 urgent things." "Yes, sir. First, send Miss Judy from the cleaning team to pick up 3 people in Queens, Building 217, Marion Sanders and her 2 siblings. Take them to the company flat in Tribeca, the one we use for visiting executives. Maximum discretion." "Understood." "And the second task," Robert pressed the flash drive in his pocket, "find our best digital security specialist. I need someone to analyze some files without leaving traces. No one from the internal team, someone external of absolute trust." "I have the perfect person. Fiona Reed, ex-FBI, now an independent consultant. She worked on that corporate espionage case with the oil company last year." "Excellent. Set up a meeting for this afternoon, and Thomas—" "Yes? Don't trust anyone from the Vanderbilt group. Absolutely no one." Hanging up the phone, Robert called a taxi. On the way to the hospital, his mind worked frantically, trying to connect all the pieces of the puzzle that was forming. The flash drive in his pocket might contain the answers he was looking for, but it also brought new questions. Who else would be involved besides Richard? What was Catherine's true role in this plot? And most importantly, how had he been so blind as not to notice the conspiracy forming around him? As the taxi wound through the growing morning traffic of New York, Robert made a silent promise to himself. Regardless of how painful the truth might be, he would find it. And when he did, those who had tried to destroy him would discover why. Robert Anderson had reached the top, not just for his business vision, but for his relentless determination. St. Luke's Hospital presented a deceptive tranquility when Robert arrived. In the corridor leading to Catherine's private room, 2 security guards hired by Thomas stood discreetly, wearing dark suits that couldn't completely disguise the bulges of guns under their jackets. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," greeted the older of them, an ex-police officer named Gomez who had worked for Robert for years. "No one has entered the room except Dr. Paul and the designated nurse, as per your instructions. Any attempts?" "Mr. Richard Vanderbilt appeared around 6 in the morning. He insisted quite a bit, said he was family. When we informed him that only people expressly authorized by you could enter, he became agitated." "I can imagine," murmured Robert. "Anyone else?" "Edward Vanderbilt called from Switzerland. The reception informed him about the visitation protocol. He said he's returning immediately, should arrive in the States tonight." The mention of the Vanderbilt family patriarch made Robert reflect. Edward, at 70, was a respected figure in the American business world. Conservative in business, ruthless with competitors, but known for his personal code of ethics and his devotion to family. How would he react to knowing that his nephew had apparently tried to poison his own daughter? Or worse, if he discovered that Catherine was possibly involved in a conspiracy. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Paul's voice interrupted his thoughts. The doctor approached down the corridor, exam folder in hand. "Can we talk before you see Catherine?" Robert nodded, following the doctor to a small meeting room. Paul carefully closed the door before speaking. "The latest tests show significant improvement. The compound is being naturally eliminated from her body, faster than we expected." "That's good, isn't it?" "Yes and no." Paul opened the folder, revealing colorful graphs and data tables. "It's excellent for her recovery, but raises disturbing questions about the incident." "What kind of questions?" "The RC47 has a very specific action profile. In high doses, it causes severe neurological symptoms, seizures, respiratory paralysis. In smaller doses, it causes milder reactions, similar to common food poisoning." "And what did Catherine receive?" "That's the question. From the concentration found in her body, it was an intermediate dose, enough to cause alarming symptoms but not lethal." Paul removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "In other words, whoever administered the compound knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't want to kill her, just temporarily incapacitate her." The revelation hit Robert like a punch. If the target was really him, as Marion suggested, would the dose have been lethal? Or was the plan never to kill anyone, just to create a situation of controlled crisis? "There's one more thing," continued Paul. "We found traces of a second compound, a substance that temporarily amplifies the effects of RC47. It's as if someone wanted to ensure that the symptoms were dramatic enough to require hospitalization, but not permanent." "An elaborate theater," murmured Robert, more to himself than to the doctor. "Pardon?" "Nothing. Can I see her now?" Paul nodded, putting away the tests. "She's lucid, but fragile. Physically recovering well, but emotionally confused would be the best description. She says she doesn't remember much after the beginning of dinner." "Convenient amnesia," thought Robert, but he just thanked the doctor before heading to Catherine's room. He took a deep breath before opening the door. As far as he knew, he was about to confront a woman who had possibly planned to poison him, or perhaps an innocent victim like himself. The truth, he suspected, would be more complicated than either of these possibilities. Catherine looked fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her face, normally perfectly made up, was pale and without artifice. Her blonde hair, always impeccably arranged, fell lifelessly around her face. Seeing Robert, her eyes lit up. "Love." Her voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "Finally." Robert approached cautiously, sitting in the chair beside the bed. He took her hand in his, noticing how cold it was. "How are you feeling?" he asked, studying every micro-expression on her face. "Like I've been run over by a truck." She tried to smile. "What happened?" "Paul told me something about an allergic reaction, but he's being evasive about the details." Robert chose his words carefully. "You don't remember the dinner?" "I remember arriving at the restaurant, you being late as always." A slight smile played on her lips. "Then, fragments. Champagne, we talked about the merger, and then nothing. I woke up here with tubes and machines all around. You don't remember a girl at the restaurant? A child who came running in?" Catherine frowned, apparently making an effort to remember. "No, none of that." "Why? What would a child have to do with what happened?" Was it a perfect act or genuine confusion? Robert couldn't decide. Years of negotiating with the country's shrewdest businessmen had honed his ability to detect lies, but Catherine had always been an enigma to him, even in the best of times. "You were poisoned, Catherine." The direct statement made her eyes widen. "Poisoned? But how? Why?" "I was hoping you could tell me." A tense silence fell between them. Catherine withdrew her hand from his, a hurt expression forming on her face. "You think I had something to do with this? Is that what you're insinuating, Robert?" "I'm not insinuating anything, I'm asking directly. How can you—" Tears began to form in her eyes. "After everything we've been through together, you accuse me when I'm lying in a hospital bed." Robert felt himself waver. The tears seemed genuine, the hurt in her voice convincing. For a moment he doubted everything he had discovered in the last few hours. "Your cousin Richard was seen putting something in your plate," he said, carefully observing her reaction. The surprise in Catherine's eyes seemed real. "Richard? That's absurd. Why would he do something like that?" "Perhaps for the same reasons that took you to New York 3 weeks ago, to meet with a specialist in experimental pharmaceutical compounds." Catherine's face paled even more, if that was possible. Her breathing became visibly faster, the heart monitor beside the bed recording the increase in beats. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you lied about that trip, just as you lied about many other things, didn't you, Catherine?" She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, something had changed. The vulnerability gave way to a calculated coldness that Robert had never witnessed before. "You don't understand what you're getting into, Robert. Some truths are too dangerous. Try telling me the truth for a change." A sad smile appeared on her lips. "The truth. The truth is that I loved you, Robert. Really. That wasn't in the initial plan." The confession hit him like a physical blow. "What plan, Catherine?" Before she could answer, the door opened abruptly. Richard Vanderbilt entered, completely ignoring the protests of the security guards who tried to stop him. Tall and slender like all the Vanderbilts, he had the same blonde hair as Catherine, although his eyes were of a colder blue, almost grey. "Dearest cousin," Richard's voice overflowed with false cordiality, "your guard dogs are truly dedicated. I had to remind them that I'm family, after all." "You shouldn't be here, Richard." Robert's voice was controlled but loaded with threat. "And miss the chance to check how my beloved cousin is recovering." "Never." Richard approached the bed, depositing a formal kiss on Catherine's forehead. "You gave us quite a scare, dear." Catherine's eyes met Richard's, and something indescribable passed between them, a silent code that Robert couldn't decipher. "It was just an allergic reaction, cousin," she replied, her voice suddenly firm. "Nothing to worry about." Of course. I'm relieved." Richard turned to Robert. "I imagine our celebration dinner for the merger will have to be postponed, no? How inconvenient." The way he pronounced inconvenient carried a dark subtext that didn't go unnoticed. Robert remained impassive, years of tense negotiations serving him well at that moment. "The merger is temporarily suspended, Richard, until we have clarity about certain details." A shadow of concern crossed Richard's face. "What kind of details?" "The kind that appears in security recordings, for example." Richard visibly paled but recovered with admirable quickness. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I came only to visit my cousin and ensure that the family business continues, flowing during her current disposition." "The family business is very well taken care of," intervened Catherine, her voice surprisingly energetic for someone in recovery. "I myself will give the necessary instructions as soon as I leave here. That could take time, dear cousin, and with Uncle Edward still in Switzerland." "My father arrives tonight," Catherine cut in, and Robert realized that the news caught Richard by surprise. "He called me a while ago." Richard's smile faltered for an instant. Wonderful, the family reunited again. At that moment, Robert's phone vibrated. It was a message from Thomas. "Urgent, Fiona Reed decoded the content. You need to see this immediately." "I need to go," announced Robert, standing up. "Pressing matters." "More important than your hospitalized—" "Fiancé," provoked Richard. "They're related to the poisoning attempt, actually." Robert fixed his gaze on Richard. "The police are very interested in the security footage from the restaurant." The mention of the police wasn't true. Robert had decided to keep the authorities out for now to avoid leaks, but the effect on Richard was visible. His aristocratic face briefly contracted with something close to panic. "Poisoning? What absurdity is this? Ask your supplier of RC-47. The name of the compound made Richard physically recoil as if he had been slapped. Beside him, Catherine closed her eyes, an expression of defeat on her face. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Richard, but his voice betrayed his agitation. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls." When Richard hurriedly left, Robert turned to Catherine. She was looking at him with a complex expression. regret, fear, and something else, something he couldn't identify. "It was you who alerted your father, wasn't it?" he asked. "You called Edward in Switzerland?" "Yes," she admitted. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed even in family." "What lines, Catherine? What's really happening?" She held his hand with surprising strength. "Go find out what your source found, then come back to me. I promise I'll tell you everything I know." Her eyes shone with a new intensity. "But Robert, be careful. There are more people involved in this than you imagine. Powerful people. You're telling me to trust you after everything?" A sad smile appeared on her face. "No, I'm telling you not to trust anyone, not even me." In the corridor, Robert found Thomas anxiously waiting. His assistant seemed tenser than usual, his tie slightly loose, a clear sign of agitation for someone normally impeccable. "Fiona is in the private room at the end of the corridor," he informed, quickly leading Robert. "What she found, well, it's better that you see for yourself." The room, originally intended for private medical consultations, had been converted into a small operations center. Laptops, secure communication devices, and a small printer occupied the central table, where a middle-aged woman with short grey hair was working intensely. "Fiona Reed," she introduced herself without taking her eyes off the screen, ex-cybercrime unit of the FBI, currently an independent consultant and apparently digital archaeologist for billionaires in distress. Despite the tension of the moment, Robert couldn't avoid a small smile. Her frankness was refreshing after so many layers of deception. "What did you find?" "A sophisticated scheme of resource diversion, international money laundering, and, most interestingly, an elaborate attempt to take control of Anderson Holdings without you noticing." Fiona turned the screen so he could see. "These emails between Catherine and Richard date from 8 months ago, when the first merger proposal was made." Robert examined the correspondence, feeling a growing nausea as he read the words exchanged between his fiancée and her cousin. They openly discussed how to use the relationship with Robert to facilitate a hostile acquisition disguised as a friendly merger. "Continue," he asked, his voice tense. "Things got more interesting about 3 months ago. Catherine began sending emails to an encrypted address that I couldn't completely trace. The content suggests she was having doubts about the plan." Fiona opened another series of messages. In them, Catherine expressed concern about the extreme methods proposed by Richard, insisting that there must be another way, without resorting to desperate measures. "It seems there was a split between them," continued Fiona. "Richard wanted to proceed with the original plan, which apparently involved permanently incapacitating you after the merger was complete. Catherine proposed a less drastic approach." "She fell in love," murmured Thomas, who was observing over Robert's shoulder. "The old story, infiltrate, seduce, betray, but end up falling in love for real." "Don't romanticize, Thomas," reprimanded Robert, although the same idea had crossed his mind. Catherine simply realized there would be less risky ways to get what she wanted. "Perhaps," agreed Fiona, "but there's something even stranger. In the last days before the incident, Catherine sent a series of documents to this same mysterious contact. Documents that exposed the entire scheme, including the financial movements, offshore accounts, everything. She was creating insurance," concluded Robert, "protection against Richard." "Exactly. And the most interesting part, I found a transfer of $5 million from an account in the Cayman Islands to a Swiss foundation called New Beginnings. The transfer was made yesterday morning, hours before the dinner." "New Beginnings?" Robert frowned. "That sounds like—" "An escape route," completed Fiona. "Someone was preparing to disappear with a lot of money in case things went wrong." "Catherine or Richard?" Fiona smiled, satisfied with the question. "Here's the final detail. The foundation was created 3 weeks ago with 2 beneficiaries. One uses the pseudonym Phoenix, which appears in Catherine's emails. The other," she made a dramatic pause, "is registered as Edward 5. "Edward Vanderbilt?" Robert suddenly felt dizzy. "Catherine's father is involved in this. Or someone is using his name," pondered Thomas. "A smokescreen." "Either way," intervened Fiona, "we have a fascinating puzzle. Catherine planning with Richard, then apparently Betraying Richard, Richard trying to eliminate someone at dinner, and a mysterious connection with Edward Vanderbilt, who conveniently is returning from Switzerland tonight. Robert sat heavily, trying to organize the whirlwind of information. Where are Marion and her siblings? Safe in the Tribeca flat, answered Thomas promptly. Miss Judy is with them. No one knows the location except us three. Excellent. Keep them there. Robert turned to Fiona. I need you to continue investigating this mysterious contact of Catherine's, and I want to know more about this Swiss foundation. Already on it. My Interpol contacts still owe me some favors. When he was alone with Thomas, Robert allowed himself a moment of weakness, rubbing his tired face with his hands. What do you intend to do now, sir? Asked his assistant. Wait for Edward Vanderbilt to arrive. Confront Catherine with what we've discovered, and... He hesitated, remembering the velvet box he still carried in his jacket pocket. Find out if everything we lived through in the last 2 years was just an elaborate staging. And if it was? Robert looked out the window, observing the sunset that was beginning to tinge the New York sky with orange hues. Then Richard Vanderbilt will learn that I'm not the only one who knows how to play this game. On the horizon, a plane crossed the sky, possibly bringing Edward Vanderbilt back to the United States. With him, Robert suspected, would come the final confrontation of this story that had begun with a simple dinner and the warning of a street girl named Maria. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The VIP lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was practically empty at that hour of the night. Robert observed through the large glass panels the lights of the landing strip, where a private jet had just touched down. The aircraft, a Gulfstream G650 with the discreet insignia of the Vanderbilt Group on the tail, taxied smoothly to the area reserved for executive flights. Mr. Edward Vanderbilt's flight has just landed, sir, informed Thomas, moving away from the information counter. The airport staff says the disembarkation will be done in approximately 15 minutes. Robert nodded, checking his watch. It was just after 10 p.m., a day and a half after the incident at the restaurant. The last 36 hours had been a roller coaster of revelations and suspicions, each new discovery opening additional layers of complexity. While waiting, he mentally recapitulated what he knew so far. Catherine and Richard had initially conspired to use the merger as a means to take control of Anderson Holdings. At some point, Catherine began to have doubts about the plan, possibly due to the drastic methods proposed by Richard. At the fateful dinner, Richard tried to poison someone, probably Robert, using Catherine's plate as a vehicle. The plan went wrong when Catherine herself ingested part of the contaminated food. There was still the mysterious Swiss foundation and the possible connection with Edward Vanderbilt. Sir, Thomas's voice interrupted his reflections. About Richard Vanderbilt? Yes? Our contacts inform that he left the hospital 3 hours ago and went straight to the Vanderbilt Group headquarters. He met with several executives and lawyers as a matter of urgency. He's preparing, concluded Robert. He knows we're discovering the scheme and is trying to get ahead. There's one more thing, continued Thomas, his normally impassive expression betraying concern. Fiona Reed managed to decipher more files from the flash drive. It seems the original plan included the complete dissolution of Anderson Holdings after the merger. The assets would be sold separately, the executive team dispersed, and the brand would simply cease to exist. Robert felt a wave of anger course through his body. The company he had built from scratch, which carried his family name, would be dismembered and erased from American business history. 15 years of hard work, thousands of jobs, projects that transformed entire communities, all would be sacrificed on the altar of Vanderbilt greed. Fiona also found something curious, added Thomas, consulting his tablet. Documents indicating that Catherine began transferring Vanderbilt Group shares to a personal holding about 3 months ago. Small quantities, nothing that would raise suspicions, but the accumulated already represents almost 8% of the total. Exactly. When she began to have doubts about Richard's plan, murmured Robert, she was creating her own parallel scheme. A movement at the door of the VIP lounge interrupted the conversation. Edward Vanderbilt entered, accompanied by 2 assistants and a personal security guard. At 70, the family patriarch maintained the erect posture and penetrating gaze that had made him legendary in the corporate world. His completely white hair, impeccably combed back, contrasted with the dark Italian-cut suit. "Robert," Edward's grave and controlled voice sounded through the environment. It wasn't a question, nor exactly a greeting, just the acknowledgement of an expected presence. "Edward," replied Robert in the same tone, standing up. "Thank you for coming so quickly. My daughter is hospitalized after a poisoning attempt. Where else would I be?" Edward dismissed his companions with a subtle gesture, approaching Robert. "Can we talk in private?" "Of course. Thomas, please." When they were alone, Edward Vanderbilt went to the bar of the VIP lounge, serving himself a generous dose of whiskey. "Would you like some?" he offered, raising the bottle. "No, thank you. I need to keep my mind clear." Edward smiled slightly. "Always the strategist. It was one of the first things I admired about you, you know? Your ability to maintain focus even in the most adverse circumstances." He took a sip of the amber liquid. "So, what exactly happened at high tide?" Robert carefully observed the man before him. Edward Vanderbilt was a living legend. He had built an empire from nothing, survived economic crises, political scandals, and hostile takeover attempts. It was impossible to read his true intentions behind the mask of the concerned patriarch. "I believe you already know, Edward. The question is, what is your role in all this?" The patriarch's blue eyes, the same eyes as Catherine's, fixed on Robert's. Straight to the point. Another quality I admire. Edward sat in a leather armchair, indicating for Robert to do the same. "How about we start with what you've discovered so far? Save us time." "Richard tried to poison me using Catherine's plate as a vehicle. The plan went wrong when she ate before I could completely prevent her. The objective was to incapacitate me so that the merger could be manipulated, allowing the Vanderbilt Group to take control of my company to later dismember it." Edward listened without showing surprise. "Continue." "Catherine was initially involved in the plan, but apparently began to have doubts in recent months. She established a mysterious contact, possibly as insurance against Richard, and, curiously, transferred a significant amount to a Swiss foundation called New Beginnings, which has you as one of the beneficiaries." To this, Edward reacted, a slight arching of eyebrows almost imperceptible to someone who wasn't observing carefully. "Impressive. In less than 2 days, you've unraveled a plot that took months to be woven." Edward finished his whiskey in a single gulp. "But you're still missing the central piece of the puzzle, Robert. Which would be why Richard would do this. What would be his motivation to risk everything, his position in the company, his freedom, potentially his life, to sabotage a merger that would benefit everyone?" Robert leaned slightly forward. "Power, control, the usual motives." Edward let out a brief laugh without humor. "So simple and so incomplete. Richard isn't acting alone, he never was. He's just a pawn in a much bigger game." "And who's the king on this board, Edward? You?" "Ah, Robert," Edward stood up, walking to the window. "You still haven't realized, have you? Neither I nor Richard nor even you are kings in this game. We're all pieces being moved by forces we barely understand. You're being melodramatic. We're talking about business, not a global conspiracy. Aren't we?" Edward turned, his face suddenly older, more tired. "What do you think happened in Switzerland during my trip? Why do you think I needed to leave the country precisely in the week of the final signing of the merger?" The question caught Robert off guard. Until then, Edward's trip had seemed a peripheral detail, perhaps a maneuver to give space to Richard and Catherine. "I was summoned by our international investors," continued Edward. "People you prefer not to know, believe me. People who financed the expansion of the Vanderbilt Group in the 90s, when America was economically unstable. You're talking about illicit money," concluded Robert, feeling the weight of the revelation. "I'm talking about business survival in a time when the rules were different." Edward served himself another dose of whiskey. "These investors have been closely following the rapprochement between our companies. The merger represented an opportunity for them, a way to clean certain investments through a company with the immaculate reputation of Anderson Holdings. Money laundering on a corporate scale, murmured Robert, the pieces beginning to fit together. And you allowed this? Allowed? Edward let out a bitter laugh. My dear, I long ago ceased to have the luxury of allowing or preventing certain things. My function became to manage the consequences, protect what I can, especially my family. Does Catherine know this? Catherine discovered by accident approximately 3 months ago. She found documents she shouldn't have seen. She confronted me and I did what any father would do. I tried to protect her. By telling her the truth, part of it, enough for her to understand the gravity of the situation, but not so much that it would put her in greater danger. Robert stood up, unable to continue sitting while processing this information. This doesn't explain the poisoning attempt. Why would Richard try to eliminate me if the objective was to use my company for money laundering? Edward hesitated, for the first time, as if carefully measuring his next words. Because you, Robert Anderson, represent a risk they are not willing to take. What risk? Your integrity. Edward pronounced the word with a mixture of admiration and regret. You built your reputation on solid principles. You rejected dubious partnerships, denounced corruption in public contracts, implemented compliance policies that are a reference in the sector. In short, you are too incorruptible for their taste. So the idea was to remove me after the merger, use my company and then discard it along with me. Originally, yes, Richard was in charge of coordinating that part of the plan. He always had a predilection for extreme methods. And Catherine, what was her role? A gleam of pride appeared in Edward's tired eyes. My daughter was sent to win your trust, facilitate the rapprochement between the companies. What no one predicted was that she would really fall in love with you. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. Despite all the revelations, a part of him still clung to the hope that what he felt for Catherine, and she for him, was genuine. When Catherine realized the extent of Richard's plan, she came to me secretly, continued Edward. Together we began to elaborate an alternative strategy. The Swiss Foundation, the compromising documents, all this is part of our attempt to create the safe exit. Exit for whom exactly? For all of us, if possible, for Catherine and for you at the minimum. Edward sat back down, the fatigue of the trip and the weight of the revelations finally manifesting. Richard discovered our parallel strategy. That's why he decided to act at dinner, anticipating our plans. He didn't intend to poison Catherine. The target was always you, but something went wrong. A street girl named Maria, said Robert. She saw Richard putting something in the food and warned me. Chance has a peculiar sense of humor, commented Edward. A child undid the carefully elaborated plans of some of the most powerful men in the country. It wasn't chance, corrected Robert. It was Maria's sister, Marion. She works in cleaning at my company, heard conversations, connected the dots. They risked a lot to warn me. Edward nodded slowly. Common people frequently show extraordinary courage. That's why I've always believed that in the end, integrity prevails over greed. Inspiring words for someone who spent decades dealing with dirty money. The comment hit Edward like a physical blow. For a moment, his mask of controlled patriarch fell, revealing the face of a man tormented by his own choices. You think? I don't regret it, Robert. That I haven't spent sleepless nights imagining how it would be if I had refused that first dubious investment. Edward ran his hand through his white hair. Each compromise we make with our integrity seems small at the moment, justifiable by the circumstances. It's only later, when we look back and see the distance traveled, that we realize how far we've strayed from who we intended to be. Robert felt an unexpected flash of empathy for the man before him. Despite everything, Edward Vanderbilt was just a man who had made difficult choices, some wrong, driven by ambition and the desire to protect what he had built. What happens now? Asked Robert after a moment of silence. Richard certainly already knows I'm back and suspects we're talking. He'll try to act quickly, probably calling an extraordinary board meeting for early tomorrow morning. claiming that my judgment is compromised by concern for Catherine. Does he have enough support on the board? Unfortunately, yes. In recent years, while I was focusing on preparing Catherine for succession, Richard cultivated strategic allies. Several directors owe him favors or share his flexible methods. And these international investors, will they simply allow us to change their plans? Edward smiled sadly. They've already been informed of the situation. At this moment, they're evaluating their options. People like them don't react well to changes in plans, Robert. A chill ran down Robert's spine. We're in real danger, aren't we? All of us. Edward checked his watch. We have a few hours until dawn. After that, things will start to move quickly. What do you suggest? You have the compromising documents, correct? The ones Marion provided and what Fiona Reed decoded? Yes. And I have the complete content of the Swiss Foundation, including records of all suspicious transactions from the last 20 years. Edward leaned forward. Together we have enough leverage to negotiate. Negotiate? With international criminals? Robert shook his head, incredulous. You still don't understand, Edward. I won't compromise my company or my principles. Nor am I suggesting that. I'm proposing an exit that protects everyone. You, Catherine, even the people who work for our companies who have nothing to do with this situation. And what would this miraculous exit be? Edward stood up, approaching Robert. Let's see Catherine. She has the final piece of this puzzle. Catherine is sedated for the night, according to the doctors. Trust me, insisted Edward, a determined gleam in his eyes. My daughter is never completely out of the game. When they left the VIP lounge, Thomas approached quickly, his face tense. Sir, I just received a call from Fiona Reed. There was an attempt to breach the hospital's security system. Someone tried to remotely access Catherine's room. Edward and Robert exchanged concerned looks. Richard is moving faster than we anticipated, murmured the patriarch. We need to get to the hospital now. On the way to the car, Edward held Robert's arm. There's one last thing you need to know before we face what's ahead. What? Catherine really loves you. What began as part of a plan became genuine. That's what changed everything, what made her seek an alternative exit. Robert stared at the man who would almost have become his father-in-law, looking for any sign of manipulation or lie. He found only the tired sincerity of a father trying to protect his daughter. We'll see, he simply replied, as they entered the car that would take them to the final confrontation of this story that had begun with a simple dinner and the warning, "Father Street Girl." The night was already late when Robert's car entered the underground garage of St. Luke's Hospital. The place was unusually quiet, with only a few vehicles parked in the spaces reserved for on-call doctors. Thomas, always efficient, had arranged a discreet entrance to avoid any possibility of being seen. The security guards I positioned at the main accesses haven't reported anything suspicious, he informed, while guiding Robert and Edward to the service elevator. But Fiona insists that the attempt to breach the system was too sophisticated for a common hacker. Richard wouldn't do the dirty work personally, commented Edward, his voice low and tense. He always outsources risk. The elevator silently rose to the floor where Catherine was hospitalized. When the doors opened, they were greeted by Gomes, Robert's personal security guard. Mr. Anderson, he greeted with a discreet nod. All quiet so far, but, encouraged Robert, noticing the hesitation. 20 minutes ago, we received a call from reception informing that a specialist sent by Dr. Paul needed to check Mrs. Vanderbilt's cardiac monitors. When we confirmed with the doctor, he hadn't authorized anyone. Edward and Robert exchanged concerned looks. The attempt to breach the security system was probably a distraction, concluded Thomas. The real objective would be to send someone physically to the room. Is Catherine all right? The concern was genuine in Edward's voice. Yes, sir. We reinforced security and implemented a double verification protocol for anyone trying to enter. The room, even hospital staff. Robert felt momentary relief but knew they were just buying time. Richard wouldn't easily give up, especially now that Edward had returned and was clearly allied with Robert. Let's see Catherine, he said, heading to the room. Inside the hospital room, the lights were reduced, creating an atmosphere of tranquil penumbra. To Robert's surprise, Catherine was awake, sitting in bed with several pillows accommodated behind her back. She seemed stronger than the last time he had seen her, although she was still pale. Her eyes lit up at seeing her father, but it was on Robert that her gaze fixed with greater intensity. "You two together," she commented with a slight smile, "means you're finally comparing notes." Edward approached his daughter, kissing her on the forehead. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Better. The doctors say there won't be permanent sequelae." Catherine directed her gaze to Robert. "Did you talk to my father?" "Yes. He told me about the international investors, about how Richard planned to remove me after the merger." Robert kept his voice controlled, but couldn't completely hide the hurt. "He also mentioned your initial role in all this." Catherine didn't look away. "Should I deny it? Make up some excuse? No, you deserve the truth, however painful it may be." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Yes, initially I approached you as part of the plan. I studied your tastes, your habits, created situations for us to meet accidentally. It was calculated, cold, and unforgivable." Robert felt his heart tighten with the direct confession. A part of him still hoped for a denial, some explanation that would preserve at least the memory of what he had believed to be real. "When did it change?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. A sad smile appeared on Catherine's lips. "There wasn't a specific moment, a dramatic instant of revelation. It was gradual, like most true things in life." She extended her hand, not touching Robert, but leaving the invitation implicit. "Perhaps it began on that trip to the Hamptons, when we got stranded by the rain in that inn for 3 days, or when you cancelled that important meeting to accompany me to the doctor when I thought I had dengue fever." Edward moved away discreetly, giving them a moment of privacy, and joined Thomas near the window. "Small moments," continued Catherine, "in which you showed who you really were, not the calculating businessman I expected to find, but a man with principles, with compassion, with an integrity that I had forgotten existed in the business world." Robert finally took Catherine's extended hand. It was cold, but the grip was surprisingly firm. "When I discovered the full extent of Richard's plan," she continued, "I realized I couldn't allow that to happen, not just because of what I felt for you, but because I finally understood the value of what you built, not just a financial empire, but a legacy of principles. Why didn't you come directly to me? Why all these secret maneuvers?" "Because I know Richard better than most. I know what he's capable of when he feels threatened." Catherine briefly looked at her father. "And because, being honest, I wasn't sure how you would react, if you would hate me immediately, if you would report me to the authorities, or worse, if you wouldn't believe me." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Robert tried to process everything: the initial betrayal, the change of heart, the danger that still surrounded them. "And now?" he finally asked. "What's the plan that you and your father elaborated?" Edward returned to the bed, bringing with him a tablet he took from his executive briefcase. "The New Beginnings Foundation isn't just an escape route," he explained. "It's also a repository of information. For years, discreetly, I collected evidence of all the questionable operations I was forced to facilitate. Names, dates, values, bank accounts. It's all there, encrypted and protected by a system that automatically releases the content to international authorities if something happens to me or Catherine." "An informational life insurance," murmured Robert, impressed with the patriarch's foresight. "Exactly. And in recent weeks, Catherine added her own discoveries, further strengthening the file." "But this doesn't protect us from Richard in the short term," observed Robert. "If he manages to convene the board tomorrow and obtain enough support—" "He won't succeed," interrupted Catherine, a determined gleam in her eyes, "because I have something Richard doesn't know I possess." She made a gesture for Thomas to approach. "In my apartment, in the safe behind the painting in the office. Yes, it's cliché, I know. There's a blue folder. The password is my mother's birth date, reversed." Thomas looked at Robert, who nodded, authorizing the mission. When the assistant left, Catherine continued, "In the last 3 months, I discreetly acquired additional shares of the Vanderbilt Group through different investment vehicles. Added to those I already owned and the proxies I obtained from small shareholders sympathetic to my position, I now represent 38% of the voting power on the board. Edward couldn't hide his surprise. How did you manage that without me knowing? A proud smile appeared on Catherine's face. I learned from the best, Father. You always said that information and timing are the true currencies of corporate power. Richard owns or controls approximately 27%, pondered Edward, making mental calculations. With my 15%, you would have a comfortable majority. Exactly. And the blue folder contains all the proxies duly signed and notarized, ready to be used. Robert observed the interaction between father and daughter with a mixture of admiration and caution. The Vanderbilts were, without doubt, brilliant strategists, even when fighting among themselves. That solves the problem of corporate control, he admitted, but doesn't address the broader issue of the international investors. If they're as dangerous as you indicate, they won't simply accept a no as an answer. True, agreed Edward. That's why we need to offer an alternative that meets their financial interests without compromising the integrity of Anderson Holdings. And what would this miraculous alternative be? Catherine and Edward exchanged looks, as if silently confirming something already discussed. We cancel the complete merger, proposed Catherine. Instead, we create a specific joint venture for international projects. Anderson Holdings maintains its operational and financial independence in the United States, while the new entity serves as a vehicle for external investments under strict legal and financial supervision. Supervision that you yourself would guarantee? Questioned Robert, skeptical. No, she promptly replied. Supervision from an independent international audit, selected jointly by both companies. Total transparency for you, limited but sufficient. Access for them. The proposal was ingenious. It maintained the essence of Robert's business intact, while offering a controlled channel for the external interests that Edward had inadvertently attracted over the years. And Richard? A cold smile appeared on Edward's face. My nephew made the mistake of trying to poison the legitimate heir of the Vanderbilt Group. Even our most morally flexible investors have limits for internal betrayals. Besides, with the evidence we possess about his parallel negotiations, Richard will be discreetly removed to a position without real power. Golden exile, summarized Catherine. An international directorship somewhere distant, with enough benefits to keep his vanity satisfied, but without access to crucial operations. Robert stood up, walking to the window. Outside, New York City slept under a mantle of light spread across the urban landscape. Somewhere in that city, Maria and her family lived in precarious conditions, while he and the Vanderbilts discussed the fate of billions. There's an additional condition I want to impose, he said finally, turning to Catherine and Edward. Any agreement we make must include a substantial fund for social development, focused specifically on children in vulnerable situations. Catherine smiled, as if she expected exactly this proposal. I already included that in the draft of the agreement. 5% of the combined annual profits of both companies, administered by an independent foundation. 10%, counter-proposed Robert. 7, countered Edward, the born negotiator instinctively emerging. 8, and the foundation bears Maria's name, finalized Robert. Father and daughter exchanged looks, then nodded in agreement. Maria. Foundation, agreed Catherine. It has a nice sound. At that moment, Thomas returned, bringing with him a blue folder. As requested, the apartment was secure, no sign of invasion or surveillance. Catherine opened the folder, revealing dozens of legal documents meticulously organized. Now we have everything we need to face Richard tomorrow. Actually, intervened Thomas, checking his cell phone, I just received a message from Fiona. Richard is calling the board members for an extraordinary meeting at 7 in the morning. Earlier than we expected, commented Edward, checking his watch that marked just after midnight. He must have discovered your return to the States, suggested Robert. He's trying to act before we can organize. Catherine closed the folder with determination. Then we won't wait until tomorrow. Let's call them right now. Now in the middle of the night? Questioned Edward, surprised. Corporate emergencies don't have a schedule, Father. You yourself taught me that. Catherine turned to Thomas. Could you arrange what's necessary for a video conference from here? I'll need to appear sufficiently recovered to convey confidence, but still visibly in the hospital to underline the gravity of the situation. Thomas looked at Robert, who nodded, impressed with Catherine's mental agility even after everything she had been through. I'll manage, guaranteed the assistant, already typing instructions on his cell phone. While Thomas organized the logistics, Robert found himself again beside Catherine's bed. There was still a question that tormented him, perhaps the most important of all. If all this works, he began, carefully choosing his words, if we neutralize Richard, reorganize the companies, and establish this new arrangement, what happens? To us? The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meanings. Catherine looked at him, vulnerability finally visible behind the facade of the relentless strategist. That's the question I'm afraid to answer, she admitted softly. Because I know how much I hurt you, I know the trust I betrayed, and I know that some things, once broken, cannot simply be glued back together. Robert felt the weight of the velvet box in his pocket, the ring he had planned to offer that night at the restaurant, symbol of a future that now seemed to belong to another. Life, another reality? I'm not asking for promises or grand declarations, he continued. I just want to know if there's something real between us, something worth exploring again with time and honesty. Catherine extended her hand, gently touching Robert's face. There is something real. There always was. Even when I tried to deny it to myself. But you deserve more than words now. You deserve to see actions, consistency, transparency. She took a deep breath. If you're willing to give that chance, I promise to show who I really am. Not the Vanderbilt heiress, not the corporate strategist, just Catherine. Before Robert could respond, Thomas returned to the room. All set. The board members have been notified of an emergency. The video conference begins in 30 minutes. The events of the following hours unfolded with the intensity of a chess match at an accelerated pace. Catherine, even from her hospital bed, commanded the meeting with surprising authority. The proxies were presented, the evidence against Richard carefully exposed without revealing details that could compromise the family or attract unwanted external attention. Richard, caught by surprise by the counter-offensive, tried to argue, threaten, even appeal to family loyalty. But upon realizing he had lost the support of the majority of the board, he finally capitulated, accepting the promotion to direct the Vanderbilt Group's operations in Asia, effectively removing him from the center of power. By dawn, when the first rays of sun began to illuminate the hospital room, the new arrangement was outlined. The complete merger would be replaced by a limited strategic partnership. Anderson Holdings would maintain its independence. The Maria Foundation would be established to assist children in vulnerable situations, and an international compliance committee would oversee all joint operations, ensuring transparency without completely exposing the Vanderbilt Group's historical investors. Edward, exhausted but visibly relieved, shook Robert's hand sincerely. You are a formidable adversary and an even better ally. My daughter chose well, even if initially for the wrong reasons. When they were alone again, Catherine seemed simultaneously exhausted and invigorated by the corporate battle she had just won. What will we do now? She asked, leaning back against the pillows. Robert smiled, feeling a weight being removed from his shoulders. Now? You're going to recover completely. I'm going to ensure that Marian and her siblings have a new beginning. Perhaps even positions in the foundation that will bear Maria's name, and then, encouraged Catherine when he hesitated. And then we'll see what time has in store for us, concluded Robert, gently holding her hand. One day at a time, with honesty and without hidden agendas. I like that plan, she smiled. It seems like a good beginning. 2 weeks later, Robert parked his personal car, not the corporate Mercedes, but a more discreet model, in front of a small cafe in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. The family establishment, with its wooden tables and simple decoration, contrasted drastically with the refined environments he usually frequented. Marian was already waiting for him at a table in the back, accompanied by 2 children. Maria, the girl who had changed the course of his life with a simple warning, And Luke, a boy of approximately 6 years with the same observant look as his sister. "Mr. Anderson," greeted Marion, standing up. "Or should I say Mr. Director of the Foundation?" Robert smiled, making a gesture for her to remain seated. "Please, let's continue with Robert, and you must be Maria and Luke." Maria, less shy than her brother, extended her hand with a comical seriousness for a child of her age. "Thank you for helping my sister get a better job, sir." Robert accepted the formal greeting with equal seriousness. "Actually, I'm the one who should thank you, Maria. Your courage that night at the restaurant saved more lives than you imagine." While they had hot chocolate and talked about the plans for the newly created Maria Foundation, Robert felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The corporate world continued out there, with its complexities and challenges, but here, in that simple moment, he found a clearer purpose for everything he had built. His cell phone vibrated discreetly. It was a message from Catherine. "Meeting with international auditors concluded. Everything as we planned. Dinner later?" Robert smiled at the screen. They had agreed to rebuild their relationship slowly, truly getting to know each other this time. Each dinner, each honest conversation was a small step in that direction. "Good news?" asked Marion, noticing his smile. "Yes," he answered, putting away his cell phone. "Let's say I'm learning that some endings are, in fact, just new beginnings." Maria, with the disconcerting wisdom that children sometimes possess, nodded as if she perfectly understood. "Like in the soap opera we watch. When it seems it's over, it's actually just beginning in another way." Robert laughed, genuinely amused. "Exactly like that, Maria. Life has more twists than any soap opera." And as he observed that small family that fate had placed in his path, Robert Anderson reflected on how a simple decision, listening to the desperate warning of a child in a luxurious restaurant, had transformed not only his business future, but his understanding of what really mattered. Outside, New York City continued its eternal dance between beauty and chaos, luxury and simplicity, light and shadow. And somewhere between these extremes, ordinary people like Marion and extraordinary children like Maria reminded the powerful that sometimes true wealth lies in recognizing the value of integrity and the courage to begin again.